Good evening. Academic life consists of at least two things. One is teaching and one would be research. And I would like to talk about that, particularly looking at gender discrimination. When we look at the lecture on diversity, we would normally find some topics on gender discrimination, and these topics that you see there are typical of such, or would be typical of such a lecture. What I would like to do with this presentation, which will last 15 minutes, is that I will look quickly at the literature on each of these topics and then provide you with some local research that I've done. Some of it's not published yet, but it's all submitted and in the process, some of them very close to being published. Let me start with sex and gender. If we look at sex is what happens when birth is given. You decide this is a boy or this is a girl, and this applies to 99.9% of the population. That's your sex. Gender is the cultural role associated with that sex. So gender is to a very large extent culturally learned. Our behavior is, however, not dominated or completely dominated by our culture. Our genes, for example, prepare men for battle and women to bring up children. So our genes, in that way, differentiate between males and females. And even further, our hormones, men, particularly young men, are full of testosterone, which make them behave differently to women. And what the outcome is that when women pick careers, they are more inclined to pick careers that have personal relations in them rather than careers towards power. And I see some people think that these things are debatable. And let me just give you a practical example that men are in fact different from women. If Martina Managerial plays against Jimmy Connors will win because he's a man. You've got different hormones and you've got different genes and you've got different roles that he learns throughout his youth. There is an exception. Billie Jean King won against Robbie Ricks in another match, and that's the photo you see there. Now getting to my research on this matter. There it is. In this particular instance, I looked at post-traumatic stress disorder and how it differs in the prediction of suicide ideation in males and females. And if you look at the top line, you will see that post-traumatic stress disorder, the different elements thereof predict suicide ideation to a very large extent. This model we used for men have got a much weaker model. Also what we see is that it's different elements of post-traumatic stress disorder that influences suicide ideation. With women, it's intrusive memories, and with men, it would be hyperarousal. So there are differences in the way events influence men and women. The next thing that could be important, now I'm at the second of 6 bullets, is that gender discrimination is negative to all to parties involved. If you've got the perception that you're being discriminated against, this negatively affects your well-being. And if we look at the South African legislation, and I don't think we need the legislation, we can see that gender discrimination is common in South Africa and discrimination is common in South Africa. So there would be lots of people that's well-being is affected by this discrimination. Do we have an objective measure to see if this discrimination in fact occurs? And I think I did some very creative research in this regard. I visited airports train stations, shopping malls, and looked at the opportunities a man would have to urinate at those places compared to women's possibilities. And what I found in this particular paper is that on average, for every 10 opportunities a man has, women have about 7. So on a very practical, on an engineering level, we are discriminating against women in South Africa without any politics or whatever added to that equation. The third bullet refers to a managerial perspective on gender discrimination. In the workplace, it's normally the manager that commits this discrimination. The manager appoints people, the manager don't appoint people, they promote people. Lots of the research focuses on observing managers discriminating, for example, in the recruitment, interview, and other processes. The research that I conducted amongst 75 managers in 15 different companies indicate the specific areas within these processes that discrimination occurs. If you look at the appointment process, for example, you will see in the fourth row, I think, is the interviews. So it's not at interviews that discrimination occurs, it occurs at the job analysis level. So people think that managers report that they discriminate at that particular phase. Also, if you look at the promotion process, it's not at the interview phase. It's what happens after the interview, and I think many of us can testify to that. The interviews are fair, but then when we connive afterwards, that's where the discrimination occurs. Employee perspectives, lots of research on women. Women are discriminated against in terms of lots of things, and particularly if you look at the Gender Commission, they report on senior women. So many women in executives, so many women in middle management, and so forth. What we should also from literature see is that once we've divided people into groups, these groups are in many ways in competition with each other. They want what the other group wants, and they're envious of each other. Social identity theory and group self-serving bias is very good examples of these. What I did in this research is looked at about 1,800 employees, not at senior management level, at middle and lower levels in the organization, and asked them, do you experience gender discrimination in the workplace? If we look at the appointment process, for example, we will see that males experience the processes favoring females. The number is there, 29.1. Still with appointments, we can see that females say that males are being advantaged. So the same perception males have about females, females almost identically have about males being given unfair advantage. This goes for other processes, as you can see further, and the reverse is also true. If you look at appointment process again, females thinking that females are advantaged, and then males thinking that males are advantaged. These numbers are very, very similar across these groups in this study. Okay, objective measures. The first and most important thing that you should see here is that there's a wage gap. These people seem to earn reasonable money, but men on average get about 44,000 more than females. Is this a problem? It could be a problem if we look at equity theory. And you see that in the next paragraph there. If the inputs of males are equal to that of the inputs of females, the salaries should be equal. And this is exactly what I investigated in a relatively large group. What this statistics tells, or should tell you, is that the correlation between income and age don't differ for males and females. You see significant correlations, but the difference in the correlations are not significant. This is true in terms of general tenure. It's also true in terms of education. It's also true in terms of family responsibility. So none of these variables differentiate between men and women. So the crux of this research is that it seems that although there's a wage gap, there's no gender discrimination. We are all aware that there's lots of laws trying to effect change in society, and in that particular paper, I indicated that yes, quotas are effective to increase the number of women in management. What the effects are, I've got two papers to point to this, are that aggressive laws are effective. I repeated the South African study on visiting restrooms in New York and Washington, Miami, wherever. When you go on a trip, you need to go to the airport in any case. And the number of opportunities for men and women in the US are equal to each other, or there are more opportunities for women in the US. They refer to it as party parity legislation. The funny thing is, despite this legislation, you will still find queues in front of female restrooms in the US. I've taken photos of that. Which is, yeah. Okay, the last one that I would like to show, and I'm not going to go deep into this, but yeah, it's almost out. I hope it will be out, is that quotas are all good and fine, but it seems that women are not driving female agendas. They're driving agendas that are not typically associated with feminism, but rather with masculinity, and that is what that last paper is about. So my objective was to tell you that research can enrich teaching. Thank you.